In this video, Jordan Peterson explains two different ways of adapting to the world.
All right, so if you look at the motor strip, this is called a homunculus, and when Wilder Penfield was initially doing open, like brain surgery on people with epilepsy, you know, you're generally conscious during brain surgery, which is a rather horrifying thing to contemplate, because, you know, they don't want to cut out a part that you might need, and so they poke around in there often with electrodes, and, you know, you can report what's happening to you. Well, what Penfield did was do electrode mapping of the manner in which your body was represented in the primary motor area that was responsible for sequencing action. And what he found was this. Now, usually you don't see it like that because the way your body is laid out on your brain, it's sort of torn apart and stretched out over the motor strip. And there's weird places where the parts come together. So, for example, there's a motor homunculus, and there's a sensory homunculus. And one of the weird characteristics of the sensory homunculus is that the genital region is right beside the region for the feet. And one of the things that you can infer from that is that's why people take such delight in such things as foot massages, and why feet fetishes, for example, are quite common, because the areas do bleed into one another. So that's pretty amusing. So anyways, there's the homunculus, and you might say, well, that's how your brain thinks of your body in terms of what you can do with your body. And so that's like a human being. In fact, that might be more what a human being is like than the human being you see when you just look at a human being. And what you see is, well, we're pretty handy, and we're pretty damn mouthy. And so one of the ways you can think about that, and I think it's right, is that human beings run around taking things apart and putting them back together with their hands, and then they talk about that all the time. And we have a tremendous amount of control over our tongue. That's wired up right at birth, by the way, and lips as well. So that's a primary investigative organ, you know, and it's used for multiple purposes. So, you know, children really explore the world with their lips and tongue, and of course it's a primary area for sexual exploration. But it's also the part of our body that we use to transform the things that we can do with our hands into patterns of communication so that we can speak about what we do with our hands so that other people can learn how to do that with their hands. And if you look at your hands, what you'll see is you're mostly thumbs, right? And you know, one of the things that you always learn from scientists is that it's an opposable thumb that makes us human. And certainly the thumb, especially on the right hand, is like, you see, you've got more motor cortex devoted to your damn thumb than you do to your whole body. And that's because, well, try picking up a wrench with your back. You know, you're just not going to get very far. And so it's really useful to think about the brain-body in this homuncular fashion, because it also helps you understand other things, because you'll hear people say, well, dolphins are superhuman in their intelligence because their encephalization quotient is higher than ours. And the encephalization quotient is the ratio of brain tissue to the ratio to body weight, fundamentally. Brain weight to body weight. Yeah, that's a measure of intelligence. But the thing is that imagine a dolphin homunculus. It's like, what the hell are they going to do with all that intelligence? Like nose up some dirt on the bottom of the ocean? That's about it. They can't build anything. They can't take things apart and put them back together. And so whatever their brain is being used for, it has very little relationship to what our brain is being used for. Our bodies are articulated, where a dolphin is sort of like a test tube, you know, and they can swim like mad, and they're obviously extremely playful, which is one of the attributes of intelligent creatures. But they're not taking things apart and putting them back together like we are. And that's what we're doing all the time. We do that with our speech, is in fact the essence of taking things apart and putting them back together. You know, and the hypotheses are with regards to speech development that we developed our capacity for articulated movement before we developed our capacity for language, and that the only reason we ever developed a capacity for language was because it sort of developed as a secondary consequence of our developed ability to produce articulated action. Now, the two things probably spiraled across time. So I don't think you can, you know, it's not a chicken came first and then the egg issue. It's that chickens have eggs and eggs have chickens, and that just keeps going. But the point is that our ability to represent things in an articulated manner is directly related to our ability to use our joints in an articulated manner. And so that's what we're like in the world. We're out there doing things to it. and then talking about it. We're very handy, and we're very mouthy. So that's useful to know, because that's sort of how the brain pictures the body. And the fact that the brain pictures the body that way means that that's how the brain conceptualizes the body as an entity for use in the environment. And so you say, well, how do human beings adapt? Well, we run around taking things apart and putting them back together with our hands and talking about it. And we're very good at that. And so you could say, well, in some sense, that's our primary. I think that it's a reflection of the same processes that gave rise to the idea of the hero. Because there's two ways of adapting to the world, in some sense. One way is just to do what everyone else has done that's always worked. All animals do that. That's what they do. Like bears now and bears 1,000 years ago, it's like they're the same bear, even though they're very complicated. Same with chimps, you know. People say chimps have culture and can make tools. It's like, that's wrong. And here's why it's wrong. If a chimp could increase its domain of cultural expertise by 0.1% a generation, which is like nothing, well, run that for 7 million years at compound interest. And what happens? Well, you get Toronto, right? I mean, I don't know how much we transform our culture with each generation, but it doesn't have to be very damn much for there to be cities after 2 million years of iteration. Well, chimps are still living in the jungle. Now, they do use tools, but what seems to happen is that the environment, and they do use different tools in different locales, but what seems to happen is that the environment suggests the tools to them. So they have a certain level of intelligence, and they can figure out how to use what's at hand, and what's at hand is different in different places, so they use different tools. But that doesn't mean they're thinking up different tools. They're not, clearly, because there's no accumulation of culture. So I don't see how you can escape from that mathematical argument, and you can make the same argument to pretty much any other creature. You know, even ants, it's like they're making the same damn anthills they were making, well, God only knows how long ago. I mean, they're very successful at it, but there's no innovation. And so being the same as the things that lived before you that lived is a pretty good strategy. But that isn't the human strategy, or it's actually half the human strategy. Because half our strategy is to do what everyone else has always done, and the other half is to fix that where it's not working very well, or at least to try to fix it. And I think this is an excellent representation of the abilities we have embodied to do precisely that. So